to The Long and Short of It. I'm your host, Jennifer Wren, and of course, it could not be a long and short of it without a small technical difficulty. And based on our theme tonight, I'm just going to say it's the ghost in the machine because it is the Halloween season. I don't care if it's not October 31st. Halloween begins on October 1st for me. So tonight we are doing a spooktacular I See Dead People, amazing evening tonight. And what we're going to do, because we have some super fun ghost stories and some super interesting things to talk about when it comes to the dead men of whiskey, I'm going to go ahead and bring on my co-host, the amazing advanced Psalm, the what would I say, the Robin to my Batman, the Batman to my Robin, the beautiful, the talented, the funny Beth Hickey. Beth, how are you doing tonight?
I am great. I'm in the Monte Rosso vineyard, as you can see.
How do you get to all these vineyards every week? It's fascinating.
It's magic. It's magic. It's 2020. What's up is down. It's all good. Yeah.
It is. And tonight, we have some surprises in store. We have a very interesting and exciting guest that we both know and we actually became friends with kind of about the same time. But Beth, how is the Halloween season for you? Are you like me? Do you love ghost stories and spooks and spirits?
I love it. I grew up in haunted houses. Yes. So it speaks to me. I start playing Donovan's The Season of the Witch, usually about October 1st, and all the various like Karen Elson versions, whatnot. Love it. Trick-or-treating, not so much with the kids this year. I think what we're going to do is maybe make a theme in each room, like decorate it differently and have them go through. I don't know. So it'll be interesting.
That's really innovative and kind of exciting. Because I think it is a hard year. It's like, obviously we want to be COVID safe, but then like, how do you go out and go from house to house? And so it's presenting some of those challenges, but that is a super creative idea, Mom. That's pretty cool.
We'll see what actually happens on October 30th when I'm like, oh, tomorrow.
Well, maybe you can be as simple as doing like the peeled grapes and spaghetti. Did you ever do that where you had to like stick your hand? Yeah. Ooh, Lord, that's a very visceral experience, right?
It really is. It really is.
But, because we have so much to talk about tonight and so many cool, spooky ghost stories, I'm going to go ahead and bring on our third guest, a woman who I admire enormously, who I met at the Seattle Cocktail Conference. It was this year. It was like the last thing that we did before the world shut down. I got the pleasure of working with you and teaching Sherry and the Dalmore seminar for the trade. And when I say the trade, for those of you who are not in the spirits universe or the spirit world, that tends to be bartenders, restaurant owners, people that work in our world. And what a gift it was. So I am so pleased to welcome the host of the Dead Men of Whiskey podcast and the founder of Seattle Cocktail Week, Amy Faulkner. Welcome to The Long and Short of It. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
How are you doing? You're up there in Seattle with Beth. So what's Seattle like these days, ladies?
I've lost audio.
Oh, it's okay. Here at The Long and Short of It, we welcome all technical problems.
I'm back. I got excited and I knocked the headphones out of the thing. So
that is okay. We can hear you.
All right. So thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And I love an introduction that starts with, we met and the world came to an end shortly thereafter. So
it's very on the beach of us.
Yes.
or maybe The Stand, which is coming out again. That's how old we are. I've seen The Stand twice now. It's two recreations. So I was inspired to do this tasting tonight, first of all, by your incredible podcast, Amy. Now, I want to be clear for everybody out in YouTube land tonight. Amy's podcast is not about ghosts, even though I'm into ghosts. It's about dead people, but not necessarily those that return. So Amy, your podcast, The Dead Men of Whiskey, it has covered some greats. Uncle Nearest, of course, is in there. I think I saw, did I see George Dickel maybe?
Correct.
Is that one of the ones? Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how that got started and how you got obsessed with these dead men. Lots of dead men, by the way.
Obsessed is the correct term for this. And it started because I went on a distillery tour of a very well-known distillery. And as they were talking about the founder of that distillery, they told the story about how he passed away. And I realized that there's all these names in whiskey that we know nothing about the lives that they lived. And I'm a naturally very curious person and I like history. So I started diving into it, and I just basically became obsessed in wanting to find out. And the next person that came along was James E. Pepper. And when I immediately heard of him, and I was like, but how did he die? And everybody in the office thought that I was insane. And so I looked it up, and he had this life that was like over the top and boisterous. And he didn't disappoint in the way that he passed away. Probably his family was disappointed, but that was years ago. And so I started like just researching, and all of these people that we know their names so well actually lived pretty amazing lives, and we know nothing about them. So the podcast was born.
I just want to point out that while you were talking, my lights just flickered. So. Now, this is such an interesting topic because I was presenting. This is my third tasting today, or third official live cast today. I was talking about in single malt. It's basically impossible to discuss single malt without discussing very, very complicated and often intriguing history. And Beth, I think this is true for you too. I mean, vineyards. I mean, everything from bringing grapes over to the US or to what we call the New World, all the way to haunted vineyards. I mean, I'm sure you have some perspective in that.
Well, as she was talking about, people in this, like the spirit world, I was just thinking about, the wine. I'll save the story for later, but the wine that I brought to the table tonight, the story behind the founder of the winery deserves his own hour plus because it's so fascinating. So I mean, I'm like, I'll talk about it, but I'm gonna save. But yeah, you have the vineyards, and then Monte Rosso had a ghost winery, which is different than it being haunted, but it's a term where it means that it just kind of stood vacant for many years. But yeah, there's, of course, I mean, it's the human story, in spirit form and in wine form. So there's always some intrigue and some mystery.
And also, I love that you said ghost, because that's a phrase we use in Scotland too. A ghost distillery, the distillery that's set. We also use the term mothballed, because it's old and covered in mothballs. But one of the things I think is fascinating about when you discuss spirits and when you discuss the derivation of the word alcohol, it actually means to be possessed by. It actually has some connotations of a jinn from Middle Eastern mythology, possessing you or filling up your body with an outside force. So there's some both romance but also intrigue there, So I think what we're going to do tonight, because we only have an hour, and I could talk to you ladies for 3 hours, but this is the late night edition due to my tasting schedule today. I think we're going to go ahead and launch into our tasting, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about these spirits. So I am kicking off the night tonight with the Dalmore Cigar Malt. Now, the biggest misunderstanding we have of the Dalmore Cigar Malt is there are whiskeys out in the universe, I've had them myself, that have notes of saddle soap, leather, tobacco. Yes, these are all tasting notes in whiskey. The Dalmore Cigar Malt has none of these, nor does it taste like smoking a cigarette or a cigar. The Dalmore Cigar Malt was actually created by master blender Richard Patterson to be enjoyed with a cigar. So the idea behind the flavor profile is to be a juxtaposition, so rich tobacco smoke, aromatic smoke, and then a sweeter, more delicate whiskey that is in conversation with the cigar that you happen to be smoking. And Richard Patterson is a big cigar aficionado, so he's a good person to go to. So this beautiful whiskey, first of all, I want to showcase is wrapped in a blood vampire red spooky case, right? But I also like to think of this whiskey, I often refer to it as the lady in red. Now, I'll explain this in just 1 second. This is a no age statement whiskey. I can neither confirm or deny that the average age of the barrels in this whiskey are the high teens to the low 20s. So it's somewhere around that block. So when we say a no age statement, I think a lot of people think, oh, this is young, cheap whiskey. And that is not the case at all. In fact, I was just talking to a person asking me about whiskey aging. Oftentimes, you can find whiskey that is far north of the 17 or 18-year-old mark in an no age statement whiskey, but you're not necessarily paying an 18 or 25-year-old price for it. So that's kind of the beauty of these blends of these older ages of single malt. So the second thing is this whiskey spends the beginning of its life in those upper teens in first fill ex-bourbon American oak. Now, Beth, you've heard me say this almost every week because that is the basis of the Dalmore DNA. All of our whiskeys will start their life in that first fill ex-bourbon American oak. We like to get those big vanilla notes. We like to get that friendliness, that roundness, but also a little heat that American oak brings to these whiskeys. But then, this is why I refer to it as the lady in red. And I guess tonight we'll say the vampire in red. Mm-hmm. This particular whiskey, Richard Patterson likes to say 80% of it gets a new dress. So what does that mean? Well, basically it means that of the sum total of the whiskey that starts its life in that ex-bourbon American oak, we take 80% and we do something extra to it. So 70% of the 80%, I know it's math, I'm so sorry guys, it's late, but 70% of the 80% goes into those famous Methuselah Oloroso 30-year-old sherry casks from Gonzales Bias Bodega. So remember, every week I've talked a little bit about the fact that we use and have exclusive access to these amazing, amazing sherry casks. So that is the 70%, but then 10% goes into Grand Cru Bordeaux red wine casks. One of the things we are famous for is Richard Patterson has these incredible relationships all over Europe. And so we have access to some of the finest red wine casks in the world. So that additional 10% gets that red wine finishing. So that is the beautiful, luxurious woman in the brand new red dress. Now, what does that mean when we actually sip the whiskey? Well, first of all, like most Dalmores, it's very viscous, so it's going to coat the tongue. It's going to really be friendly and welcoming. It's one of those whiskeys that lingers and lingers and lingers. But you're going to notice in this particular whiskey, there's going to be those obvious red wine notes, a bit of cassis, a little bit of a wild cherry, a little bit of like a redolent of those rich, dark berries that almost make me think of dripping blood from a murder scene. No, that's not what I said. I'm sorry, I'm thematic tonight. But no, seriously, those rich, fine, dark berry notes. So that being said, Beth, every week, my dear Beth, like you blow me away. You have blown me away with every pairing we have done. The advantage, Beth, this week, you have a whiskey that is already dripping in red wine influence. So please, what was the wine pairing you chose this week?
This is one of the pairings where I knew immediately what I wanted to do. And I wanted to do the Louis Martini Monterosso Cabernet Sauvignon from California, the vineyard behind me. Because it's high elevation, so 1,300 feet, red volcanic soil, iconic vineyard. So you're in you're in Sonoma, and you're in, I want to say Moon Mountain, but I want to say Moon Valley. I suddenly have a brain freeze there, as we were talking about earlier before we came on. So you're in Sonoma, high elevation, 1,300 feet. It is the grapes, they're small berries. It's just concentrated fruit. I thought about that Cabernet to pair with the Cabernet finishing in the cigar malt. The cigar malt is one of my favorite expressions in the Dalmore portfolio. It pairs so beautifully with grilled meat, where you have a little bit of that Maillard reaction. So you have that caramelization of protein. We had it at a Dalmore luncheon. Everyone else had steak. I was vegetarian at the time and had it was like a grilled cauliflower steak, and it paired beautifully with that. And my mind was blown that this Scotch would go with grilled cauliflower of all things. But it was that grilling, it was that Maillard reaction. So that's what brought me to the Louis Martini Monterosso. I think it works. I'm really pleased.
I mean, I think I'm going to patent this. I'm calling it the double aroma sniff.
It works. It works.
The Rin
doing
sniff.
this. I'm going to briefly go into the story of Louis Martini. So Louis Martini in 1899, at the age of 12, leaves Genoa, Italy, to go over to the United States to see his dad in San Francisco at the age of 12.
Wow.
It's just, I mean, the story, there needs to be a podcast about his life.
And I just want to stress, this was a time you didn't hop on a plane. This was a journey.
He took a ship.
Yeah.
So he was in San Francisco. He was working with his father. I believe Chipino was part of the story. Like they would sell Chipino and people would give them, this is a bit of the mythology, but what I've been told, and that people would pay them in grapes. And so they would make wine. And in 1906, his father sent him back to Genoa to go back to school to study winemaking in Italy. And when he finished, he came back. Prohibition. So in 1922, they were making sacramental wine and selling concentrate for home winemaking kits, whatever was legal. Winery was founded in 33 and 38. Well, founded in 33, right before Prohibition ended. They anticipated the end of it, so they got the winery up. In 38, they bought the vineyard Monte Rosso, which had already been established by German immigrants before that built a winery, but it's so high and there wasn't a road until the 50s to get up to that there was essentially a ghost winery up there. So this winery is it's that red volcanic soil. It adds a concentration, a distinctiveness that volcanic soil wines have. It's really small berries because it's just not fertile soil, a concentration of flavor. It's all hand harvested. They take all the blocks, they age them separately in barrels, and then they do a final blending, and then they let that rest in other barrels it's a mix of new French oak, American oak, and neutral barrel for about 26 months total. So it's just a really rich, concentrated, elegant Cabernet. So it's a 2014, a little bit of age on it. And I'm skipping so many parts of Louis Martini's life, but that's because we only have an hour.
I mean, I have to say, I'm not a person who is normally attracted to Cabernet Sauvignon. It's not my first go-to wine. I tend to enjoy more spicy New World, like Malbecs and stuff. But this is the magic of Beth. This is what I always say every week. When I do the double sniff, it takes it from this obvious red wine note in the Dalmore cigar malt, and this obvious deep richness. Oh, bright fruit. And when you bring them together, you're getting charred Memphis barbecue.
Ooh.
Yeah, it is. There's smoke. Yeah. Amy, what are you smelling and tasting? I mean, you're over there enjoying both of these.
Now I'm obsessed with Memphis barbecue because
I
you're
know.
absolutely right.
Vinegar base.
The berry part of it is so fragrant, but now all I have is Memphis barbecue, and I'm a big fan, so there's no problem with that at all.
Well, Amy, my love, so we have presented, as we always like to say, the short. I'm the short shot of whiskey. Beth is the long pour of wine. What have you brought tonight as the third, the trifecta to our tasting tonight?
I have brought a little mini sample of some of the stories that we do on the podcast.
Love it.
And for today's pairing, I'm going to tell you about a lovely and mysterious lady named Nancy. Excuse me. So today we're going to travel back in time to the year 1886 to a state whose motto is liberty and prosperity, New Jersey. So 1886 New Jersey likely produced more Applejack than any other state. And it was definitely the drink of choice for the state. And for those of you that think that Applejack is that sugary cereal, you're not correct. It was a very popular alcoholic drink at this time. It was made from apples. It's also been called apple brandy. And my favorite name for it is Jersey Lightning.
I think that's everybody's favorite name for it. and I think it's exclusively drunk by the Jersey Devil.
Right? Or they should have sports teams named the Jersey Lightning. I'm just saying. It was actually described in a newspaper article from 1896 as a beverage that possesses heat, which is manifested by a burning sensation that follows a drink of it into the stomach. So clearly, that's where the lightning comes from. So this was a time before Prohibition, but moonshine operations were where they were selling product without a permit were not legal because the government wanted, and they continue to want today, taxes to be paid on that alcohol. So in Warren County, New Jersey, the government started getting suspicious when rumors began swirling around the area that someone was moonshining Applejack on a wholesale level. And for several weeks, the government investigated the area, but they had a really hard time coming up with anything. All of their leads didn't go anywhere. And in addition to the rumors flying around town, the farmers in the area had been complaining that their apple orchards were being robbed at night. And the farmers just suspected that it was mischievous boys, and they set up all kinds of traps to catch the thieves, but all of them were to no avail. So at this point, they didn't know what was going on. It could have been ghosts. They weren't sure, but there had been some suspicions around town that this woman named Nancy, and no one in the area seemed to know much about Nancy, despite the fact that she lived there for around 3 years. And she had been dubbed Crazy Nancy by some people in the town. And for no apparent reason. From all accounts, nothing says why they called her Crazy Nancy, other than she kind of kept to herself. And no one even really knows if Nancy was her real name.
Well, I mean, her name was McGill and she called herself Lil, but you know.
Right?
Sorry,
exactly.
sorry. I apologize for that.
In the summertime, Nancy sold berries. So I chose this story partially because the berries that complement the fruit aromas of the cigar malt and the wine that we're drinking tonight. She also sold nuts, and in the winter, she trapped and shot for animals and game that she would sell. So that was her form of income. It is the 1800s. That's a pretty common form of income. And the town didn't know much about her, but someone noticed that she'd disappear every winter for about 6 weeks. And that fact, combined with the mystery around her life in general, created this suspicion that the government was destined to look into. So to keep an eye on Nancy, an undercover revenue officer named Finch, which is the weirdest name for a revenue officer or anybody, Finch was placed as a farmhand at a nearby farm. And when he wasn't busy on the farm, because he couldn't break his cover, he would go over to Nancy's house, which was this plain wooden house that stood against this bluff that had been dug away to make it perpendicular. I also thought that this tied in because the vineyard that our wine tonight comes from is a mountain vineyard. So it's kind of mountainy, not exactly the same as California, but I thought it was appropriate. And originally Nancy's house had been a barn, and the bluff would keep the sheep protected from the cold winter and the winds and the storms. But the original farmer had left and leased the building to Nancy, so the farming operations had stopped. So if you think about it, we have this mystery woman that forages nuts and berries from the land and kills animals to sell the wares, and that's how she's living there. And Finch had been placed as this farmhand at the neighboring farm so that he could get acquainted with Nancy. But this was close to an impossible task because Nancy had zero desire to get acquainted with anyone other than to sell them something. That doesn't make her a criminal. That just makes her not wanting to talk to the neighbors. But since he couldn't get close to Nancy personally, he decided his best option would be to stake out her house. In the 1800s, this wasn't stalking. He was doing his job. But to not raise suspicious of his employer, because it was a small town, he didn't want the employer to know that he wasn't anything other than a farmhand. He would get up from his bed at night and sneak over to Nancy's house to watch what she was doing. And there were endless nights without even a sighting of Nancy. It was, after all, nighttime and cold, but one night, Finch saw a man approach the house with a heavy sack thrown over his shoulder, and the man quickly entered the house, and Finch immediately thought he would be the hero because this man had to be the apple thief. So if this man was the apple thief and he was bringing apples to Nancy, she must have been making Applejack. And Finch realized that Nancy had a male ally in the house, but at the same time, this was the moment that he needed to make it happen. So all of the honors of cracking the case would be his. So that like feeling of greed set in. And for this reason, he decided to double down on his surveillance. And after keeping watch on the house for almost a week, he didn't get much more information. He never even saw the man leave. It was cold out. If I was stuck surveilling a house in New Jersey in the winter, in the cold, and it had been a week and I hadn't seen anything, I think I would have left. Would you have stayed in there?
No, absolutely not.
No. This guy Finch was definitely determined, but he was also desperate. So one day after seeing Nancy leave the house and she was heading into town, he decided that this was the moment, and he went over to the house, he picked the lock, and he entered. Once he was inside, there was nothing suspicious. In fact, the house was pretty sparse. There were a few strings of dried apples hung over the fireplace, but that couldn't have been all of the apples that were coming in. There was a pumpkin or two on the floor. There wasn't really any furniture other than a couple of chairs and a stool. And Finch was pretty upset because this wasn't the glory that he was expecting. So he then climbed up a ladder to the loft area, and he still came up empty-handed. So he noticed that the floorboards had enough cracks in them that he could adequately view the room below. And he decided that the appropriate thing to do when breaking into somebody's house was to hide in the loft and wait for Nancy to return. So as expected, 2 hours later, Nancy returns. She spent the next hour making herself dinner, and upon completing her meal, she went and locked the door with a lit candle in hand and ascended the ladder to the loft where Finch was hiding. But she doesn't see him. She's now across the loft from where he was hiding. She starts removing the wooden wall boards of the house until she makes a hole large enough for her body to fit through. And she grabs her candle and enters the hole in the wall. There's no ghost in the hole that we know of.
I was so ready.
And then the ghost jumps out. So Finch remained in hiding for about 30 minutes, and then out of the hole, a man pops out. And as the man stood there, Finch sat in the dark behind this barrel that was up in the loft, but he could make out from the candlelight that the man was in fact Nancy. And Nancy then left on what Finch presumed to be an apple stealing expedition. So once Nancy was gone, Finch went into the hole in the wall, and he discovered a large apartment that had been dug out of a hill. And in the apartment, he found a still and around 50 jugs and a pile of apples. He also found the clothes that Nancy had been wearing lying on the floor, which confirmed all of his suspicions. And he was like, I've got her. So after he knew he had enough evidence, he returned to the downstairs of the house, and he decided to wait for Nancy under the table, because coming home to somebody hiding under your table in a sparse home is not scary at all. So sometime after midnight, Nancy returns to the house. She's dressed as a man. She drops the bag of apples that she had stolen on the floor. She lights a candle, and she takes it over to the fireplace and starts poking at the ashes to get the fire going. As her back was facing Finch, she crawled out from under the table. He pointed his revolver at her and shouted, "Hold up your hands." And then Nancy swung around in a flash while at the same time blowing out the candle. Finch then pulled the trigger, but he must have missed because the gunshot was followed by Nancy swinging a stool and hitting Finch in the face. And as Finch fell to the floor, Nancy threw open the door and disappeared into the night. The next day, the entire premise was thoroughly searched, and over 500 gallons of Applejack were discovered in the hole in the wall and under the floorboards of the house. Nancy was never seen again, and no clue to her true identity was ever discovered. The only new information that was discovered was that she had been transporting the Applejack under the berries and nuts and furs that she had been carrying to the market. And that is the story of Nancy the Moonshiner, how a mysterious woman managed an illicit still by dressing in man's clothes and stealing apples.
That was a fantastic story. I don't know if you could see my face. I was like on the edge of my seat. I was like, what? Where's the lightning? Where's the secret? Oh my God, Amy, thank you. That was thrilling. I love the fact that she not only was wily enough to do an as we say in trousers role, but she managed to escape and no one knows her identity. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think at this point, nobody's ever going to know her identity because this was in 1886.
Oh man, I feel like every time I hear about the 1800s, it's just like the wild. It's like crazy things happen in the 1800s. God, that thank you so much, because it tied in, as you said, to the mountainous regions. It tied into the sweetness of both the wine and the whiskey. So Beth, I'm gonna kick it over to you. Based on that tall tale that Amy just told, do you have a tall tale to offer tonight, or?
Well, I do, and it does come from the late 1800s as well.
Oh, of course it does, because
yes,
I'm like, there's my angle. Okay.
Crazy things happened in the 1800s.
So this is, well, so I was born in Spokane, and for a while, my rich aunt, had a mansion, which, in the 70s in Spokane doesn't sound as fancy as it was, in the South Hill, which was the old money part of town. And you would have all of the Victorian mansions, and they were beautiful. And my aunt and her husband owned one, and my dad rented the top floor. And I would spend summers with him, which meant that he would never get a babysitter, and it was just me and MTV. And it was back when there was the 4D VJs, and I would sit on a beanbag chair and I'd watch the videos. So it was amazing. I mean, like, it was actually, like, I feel pretty lucky in hindsight. At the time, though, I was always a sensitive child, and so I kind of hated being in an old house because the front part of the house felt fine. The back part of the house, which got into like the heart of the house, and down that long hallway that was like, there was the oak paneling, and you go around the corner, there was the restroom, and then the stairs to the attic. Didn't like that part of the house. I was always in the sunroom, like what we use as the living room. But one day, had to go use the restroom, and went begrudgingly, came back out. And it always gave me kind of like, like that feeling, the hairs on your neck stand up. So I came out, and I just, something in my voice or something in my mind just said, run. So I ran down the hallway, and it was a long hallway. It was a big house. And I just felt terror. I ducked into the first room that seemed safe, and it was the kitchen. So I ducked down and I hid next to the oven like this. And I looked up, and I kid you not, I saw the bottom hem of a floor-length skirt. It was green and transparent. So something had been following me. I'm thinking from the attic, because that's, where the entrance was, or this, and terrifying. I didn't look up because I was a child. I immediately went to the sunroom. The sunroom I had, deemed as being safe. It was a safe space, and just basically hid on a beanbag chair for the rest of the day. So I have been chased by a Victorian ghost. So going back to the late 1800s. Other things happened in that house, but that's my favorite story to tell.
Oh my God. So I think the joke here, Beth, is you are known for your insane vintage fashion. And apparently this obsession started when you were chased by a Victorian ghost in insane fashion. She was like, I'm fabulous. I'm going to chase Beth because Beth recognizes game when she sees it.
What's funny is one of my most recent purchases from Bushwhack Vintage, by the way, was a Victorian petticoat. So I think you're onto something.
Well, Beth, I think I've been reticent. What are you wearing tonight? Are you wearing any of your fabulous pieces tonight?
I have a 1938 Chanel I thought about wearing because that's when Louis Martini bought the Monte Rosso. But I'm also in the process of moving. So I went just classic vintage Donna Karan from the 80s.
I love it because I'm always like, is this shirt clean? That's like my complete, vetting for this show every week. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we have the Applejack Phantom, not necessarily paranormal, but the Applejack Phantom. We have the Victorian ghost that chased Beth. In this spectacular episode, I'm blown away. So I feel like tonight is a little bit of a coming out party for me. I apologize for those at home. When I am not tasting, sipping wine and whiskey with these two talented, fantastic people in the spirits industry, I love ghost schools, anything, Bigfoot, like name anything that really intrigues me or keeps me going or makes me excited about the day. If I want to calm down during the pandemic, I'm generally listening to murder podcasts and supernatural podcasts. So, guys, I'm going to tell you my whiskey ghost story. It's the only official whiskey ghost story I have, although I have many ghost stories. So I'm going to invite those out in YouTube land. If you see me at an event, because I think they will come back in 2021, I'll tell you the rest of the ghost stories, but I'm going to tell you my whiskey ghost story for now. So, whiskey ghost story. Back in my former role, the whiskey that I represented before I represented the Dalmore and Jura, I was at an ambassador conference. And that year, they decided to take all of the women on the team, which is about 6, and put us in the home of the granddaughter of the founder. So she is long since passed, but the home is infamously known to be haunted. The joke is that this particular woman, Janet Sheed Roberts, doesn't like men staying in her house. So most of the ghost stories would always come if a gentleman was staying at her home, and they would be, touched, or their things would be moved around. There's stories of bathtubs being turned on or all kinds of weird stuff. But the thing is, one of the bedrooms that is in the estate is actually Janet's bedroom. So they decided this particular year, this was 2017, to put all the female ambassadors in Janet's house. The entire time we're there, because we're respectful, every night we would return to her home and we would have some sort of like kiki in the main salon. We would like hang out after the day was over and talk to each other and be like, we're gonna have like some champagne, we're gonna have some whiskey, we're gonna like kind of shake off the day. And every night in the parlor, we would say, thank you so much, Janet, for hosting us in your house. Thank you for having us, because we're respectful. If the ghost stories were true, we wanted to make sure that we were being respectful. And the running joke was that my colleague, Tracy Franklin, was actually sleeping in Janet's room. So the entire time we were there, the joke was, if anyone's going to see this famous ghost of Janet Sheed Roberts, it's probably going to be Tracy, because she's literally sleeping in her bed. Well, nope, nothing happens. The entire time we're so excited about this haunted house. We're like, yeah, Janet Sheed, like she's a whiskey woman. We're like gonna commune with her. Nothing happens. Now, of all the women staying in the space, I'm the haunted one. I'm the one that grew up in a haunted house. I'm the one that's seen ghosts. I'm the one that has crazy stories. So Tracy kept making fun of me and saying, of course, you're going to see Janet. Like, we're not going to see Janet. You're going to see Janet. And I was like, I don't know, man. So several days go by with no incident, nothing strange. Every day, approximately 4 or 5 in the afternoon, there is a group of caretakers for the estate that would come. Oh, and I just spilled my wine all over myself. That's okay. That would come and replenish sheets or fix the house, or they were just sort of the general caretakers of the estate. And they were one or two young women. So every single person involved in the story happens to be identified female. So we're all like, we're probably not going to see Janet because we're all women. So the last day we're there, I happened to be the last person to leave the property. It just was a flight thing. It was nothing in particular, but it happened that as Tracy leaves and Beth leaves, I decide to go down to the lower floor and just check the bedrooms and just be like, maybe one of them has left a hair comb or a shoe or something, because we were all in post haste to get our flights, and just do a general walk around. Now, at this point, I am absolutely certain there is no person to my knowledge on the premises. There is literally no soul in the house except me. And I'm going from room to room. There's a little parlor downstairs. There's a couple bedrooms downstairs. And I'm just like looking around, and I'm like, someone probably left their favorite ring and I'll send it to them or whatever. And as I'm in the lower hallway, my bedroom, the room I was staying in, faced the kitchen. So if you can imagine, there was a direct line of sight from my doorway to the kitchen, the downstairs kitchen. I turn right to look into the parlor. And as I'm slowly turning left, a very tiny woman, a woman shorter than me, walks past me.
Nope.
100%. And it was so quick. It was so quick that it was like one of those moments that you're like, this person is 100% real. There was nothing ghost-like about this at all. I'm going to knock my wine over all night. There's nothing ghost-like about this at all. It's it is a full-figured, fleshed-out human person walks from my room to the kitchen. And as I'm turning, I see her, and she's in the kitchen now. So I go into the kitchen because I'm thinking this is one of the young women that's employed at the estate. And I was going to say, thank you for taking great care of us. Thank you so much for hosting us. And I literally followed directly behind this figure, and there's no one there. There's no one there. So what I saw was a woman walk from the room I was staying in 3.5 feet across the hallway into the kitchen, and I immediately followed, and there is no person there. To this day, I cannot explain it. I have absolutely no explanation for it. I 100% saw a human being walk across my line of sight and followed them within less than a second. And the house was completely empty. So if I was honored enough to experience the ghost of Janet Sheed Roberts, I'm extraordinarily honored. And no malevolent intent, no bad vibes, but there was definitely something that crossed my line of vision, and I have no explanation for it.
Wow.
So, true story. I have one more. There is a woman. Yeah, I know. I have a lot of ghost stories. I'm covered in wine now, so we'll just go with it.
The ghost did it. It's fine.
I know. No, it's actually just my clumsiness and my talking with my hands. I have one more story. So there is a woman I love dearly named Jill Boyd. And Jill Boyd used to be a blender for William Grant, and now she is a professional blender for Compass Box. And she owns a house in Elgin, which is in the Highlands of Scotland. And the house is over 100 years old. And so one of the times that I went up to the Highlands and was up there for work, I decided to stay a couple days longer and spend time with Jill. But I was horrifically tired. So she was so sweet. I went to her house and I was like, we're going to have so much fun in Elgin and we're going to have the best time. And I wound up just sleeping. So she put me to bed in her living room. And she was like, girl, get some rest. And I was like, thank you. So I nestled down. It's about 9 p.m., Scotland time. And a storm comes up. Scotland is very spooky, by the way. So a storm comes up. And there's this tree by the window that's like, do you ever see the Disney cartoon The Old Mill, where it's like the storm is raging and like the trees busting against the window? So this tree is like scratching the window, and I'm like, ooh, this is super spooky, and ooh, I can't sleep, and ooh, Scotland. And all of a sudden, and I've told Jill about this, all of a sudden, a tiny hand, a child's hand, touches my foot. And it was
That's the worst.
It was the worst. It was 100% visceral. It 100% happened. I was not asleep. I was very awake, and it literally it touched my toes, and it shook my foot, and then it went away. And I lost my sense of self and was so upset. But nothing else happened. Like there was no malevolence. There was no bad vibe. And I, of course, the next morning, I'm like, Jill, you have a child ghost in your house. And to this day, it's this running gag. I'm always asking Jill, I'm like, seen the child ghost? And she's like, no, it's just you. And I'm like, child ghost? And she swears, though, she has never experienced any kind of touch, but she has definitely experienced a feeling that something was watching her. Mm-hmm. So those are my two whiskey stories. So Elgin, the haunted Jill's house, and the haunted home of Janet Sheed Roberts, Hazelwood, my two whiskey ghost stories. So
I don't have any like stories of ghosts touching me, but I was at the Silver Queen Casino in Virginia City, Nevada, which is supposedly really haunted. And I was like, whatever, I just want to drink. And I was traveling on the road, so I had my dog with me, and my dog's very well trained. We went into the restroom, and normally if he goes into the restroom with me when we're in public, like he will immediately sit and just wait for me to do my thing. And in the middle of me using the restroom, he decides that there is no way that he is staying in the bathroom ever again, and is like strangling himself trying to get out of the bathroom. And so I left there and I came back down the hallway to go up to the bar, which it's just this little area. And when I get back to the bar, the bartender is talking about the orbs that were seen on the like surveillance camera around the time that I was back there, not inside the bathroom, but outside the bathroom and in their chapel. And it was one of the weirdest moments because my dog's pretty well trained in public places and just out of his mind insane.
That is spooky.
Yeah.
That is super spooky. Well, it's not too weird in the whiskey world. I mean, especially single malt, because Scotland is thousands of years old when you go back to the Gallic history. To have ghosts, it's actually pretty common. There are several distilleries that claim that they have, the Green Woman, or they have the dead distiller. There's a belief at one of the distilleries that one of the mistresses dances in the hall that used to be the dance hall. So lots of fun stuff. And I think it's true, Beth, for you too. Wineries have quite the crazy background.
Well, they do, and I'm trying to think if I know of any winery ghost stories. I feel kind of left out, and like I need to go do some research because I can't think of any. So if anyone out there knows them, please send them my way because I love this stuff. I can only think of my own personal experiences with ghosts, which were all as a child.
I welcome all ghost stories tonight. I'm covered in wine and seems like a appropriate.
I just love that Beth was chased, and she was like, "But what are you wearing?"
Oh, I know. She's like, I'm sorry. Is that Chanel? Because if it's not, stop.
Oh no, but it was fascinating because it was like transparent, but like green transparent. I'm like, wow, that's accurate. When people like that's actually what this one looked like. but in terms of the animal reacting, I had an apartment up here in Capitol Hill. Famous, apparently it was called the Biltmore.
Mm.
And it was built by, I think, a Norwegian man that made a lot of money in fishing, if I'm not mistaken. Had a famous architect make it. It's, it was beautiful. So it's that classic Capitol Hill, brick building, hardwood floors. And I had just moved in and something was a little odd about the place. I kind of felt like I was being watched, but I grew up in haunted houses. So it's just kind of like, okay, so there's something, but whatever. And it just getting a little bit more intense. And there was one night where I couldn't sleep because I felt like something was watching me. And the way the bedroom was is my bedroom faced I had a view of the main door. So it was at the end of the hallway and then there was the front door and you could go out. And it just felt like something was standing there at the front door. And I had 2 sleepless nights in a row and I'm like, this is not sustainable. But the night in question, so it was the 3rd night, I could not sleep. It was just so intense. And I had this white Persian cat at the time, Harry. He was adorable, kind of clueless, just looked pretty. That was kind of his main role in life. And he stood looking at the same place that I was looking at with his haunches, like his back was arched. And he was like, wow. The only time I've ever heard him make that sound. And I was like, oh, uh-oh. Oh, if clueless Harry is looking at the same place, then something's going on. Yeah, so ended up turning on all the lights, putting on music, putting on just all the distractions, all the whatnot, and then promptly smudged the place thoroughly the next several days.
Yes, I mean, that sounds like an excellent plan.
It came back one more time and then I smudged again and then it was gone forever.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I could talk about ghost stories all night. I just want to make sure before we go, we have about 5 minutes left. Can you believe it? Amy, so I just want to highlight you for a second. You are not only the co-host of the Dead Men of Whiskey podcast, that's Whiskey with Ani, but you are the founder of Seattle Cocktail Week. And it is the most amazing, unifying, community-driven, fantastic cocktail week I have experienced in years. And I've been doing this for longer than I should. So I know this is a hard question in the time of COVID, but do you have any plans or can you see anything moving forward for how Seattle Cocktail Week might come back in 2021, 2022?
These are all very good questions. And I'm so flattered that you said all those great things about it when you only experienced half of it because of COVID this year. So
that is the truth. That is the truth.
That makes me really proud. We are hoping that we will be able to bring it back the same week that we normally do it, which is the first week in March of 2021. But we're committed to bringing it back, but we also want to make sure that we are 100% safe in doing so.
Yes.
So it's a weird world. That's no surprise to anybody, but we're working with the venue to see if we can expand the floor print so that there's more space that we can provide for everyone. We're looking at different ways that we can work with our participating bars because they've been hit so hard and a lot of them are struggling just to come back from this, and we want to be as supportive as possible. And so the answer is we don't know the answer right now, but we are definitely starting to get excited again that we will soon be through this and we can have cocktails with everyone and share all of that great cocktail knowledge and have all of the amazing brands like yours join us again. So,
well, I think that I speak for myself and Beth when we say we are chomping at the bit because your week is the highlight of the year. It was such a pleasure to be part of, and I was so distinctly honored that the relationship we created from that came to you being on this podcast, or I guess live cast, we should call it. And there's a fun fact here is that when Beth and I were in the process of conceiving the long and short of it, Amy was the first guest we ever reached out to. And it was such a pleasure to involve you because you're so multifaceted. You do spirits industry work, you do community work, you are creating an incredible podcast that I encourage everyone to listen to. And again, if you want to find the episodes, go to @deadmenofwhiskey with an E. If you want to find that podcast. Someday I hope to come on and talk about some dead people, I suppose. But I mean, this is just the greatest pleasure to have you on tonight because you were part of the inspiration for the long and short of it becoming a thing, you know?
Well, thank you.
I
feel really honored when you guys are giving me accolades because I don't know, you were a big part of my own Seattle Cocktail Week experience this year. And unfortunately, we didn't get to have the big tasting event, which we call Cocktail District. That was the part of Cocktail Week that ended up being canceled because of COVID. But even this Halloween spooky episode is such a great fit because one of the things that we do for that event, and it makes me so sad that the event didn't happen, is I spend all year building these crazy things that people can experience. So I have a 14-foot flamingo downstairs that was going to be in the tiki area. And I have 5,000 balloons ready to be inflated for this art installation in another area. And I just want to see it happen. But that's also, those types of things lend really well to Halloween things. So Halloween is typically my favorite holiday of the year.
Well, I mean, I cannot wait. I cannot wait to see what you do. And as we like to say, next year in Jerusalem, it will happen. It's going to be a matter of time. But guys, it is 8:29. So I'm going to shut down this live cast of the long and short of it. Amy Faulkner, thank you so much for being here tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
You are a light in my life. I pour my wine out for you apparently. But guys,
and let's also just quickly mention that if you wish to find the spirits and the wine can be found at the Louis Martini website, Drizzly, Total Wine. You could also go to your local wine store and support them. And if they don't have it, they will most likely order it for you. So don't forget that.
That is a great call out. And of course, if you want to enjoy the Dalmore Cigar Malt, we are available nationally. And if you are ordering online, of course, Reserve Bar or wine.com or Drizzly, you can find us. But I do always encourage, as Beth said, supporting your local account because those guys are struggling. We want to make sure they are doing well. And I also want to say the thing I say every week, which is really important. All three of us on the podcast tonight are adults of drinking age. We are not driving. We are making sure to enjoy our spirits and our wine responsibly. So I deeply encourage you to do the same. If you're going to spill wine, wear a wine-colored shirt. That's the secret. Didn't know it's true, but it's true. But that being said, please always enjoy your spirits responsibly and your spirit responsibly. Thank you so much for enjoying us tonight. We are the long and short of it. This is episode 4 of 9. Next week, we come back at our regular time at 6 p.m. And we will be coming back with, I think it's the Dalmore Portwood. And what is our pairing next week? I think it's a pretty hefty one.
It's the Bronchia Il Bleu.
That's right.
We're going to Tuscany.
Oh, I'm so excited. It's going to be so good. Amy Faulkner, thank you so much for joining us. Beth, couldn't do it without you. I'm going to take us into the end, and hopefully no technical difficulties. We have a couple tonight, and sign us off for the evening. Guys, thank you so much. I hope, however you are enjoying your spooky season, that you are enjoying it together, and you stay well and healthy. And thank you so much for your patronage and your support. Good night.
I don't know if I'm supposed to stay here.
You can for a few minutes.
Oh, cool. I didn't know you could hear me.
Yep.
Thank you guys so much. I actually do have to run because I've got somebody here, but thank you.
Thank you for